Wagon Train Massacre. Fanny Kelly's captured by Sioux warriors. Wyoming, 1864. Two of the most savage-looking of the party rushed up into my wagon, with tomahawks drawn in their right hands. With their left hands, they seized me and pulled me violently to the ground. Fanny Kelly's wagon train had just been ambushed by 250 Sioux warriors, armed with rifles, bows, and war clubs. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for America's most harrowing survival tales. What terrible series of misunderstandings led to this deadly encounter that would forever change how settlers viewed their journey west. In 1864, the Kelly party's 5 wagons rolled across Wyoming, carving a path through the prairie. Oxen bound by worn harnesses trudged forward, kicking up dust. Many other wagon trains moved along the Oregon Trail that season, all driven by the same ambition. Just over those hills lies the gateway to paradise, Franklin Kelly announced, pointing toward the distant horizon, where purple mountains rose against cloudless blue skies. His wife, Fanny, nodded, her calloused hands gripping the wagon seat as they navigated another rocky stretch. Their wagon led the small caravan of 5. The Wakefields followed close behind, then the Larimer family, and finally, the Taylors and Mr. Sharp bringing up the rear. The small band had chosen to travel separately from the larger emigrant trains. Smaller groups moved faster, and the roads seemed safe enough, according to every authority they'd encountered. 3 more weeks to Idaho if we keep this pace, Mr. Wakefield called from the second wagon. Gold the size of hen's eggs, just waiting to be picked up. At Fort Laramie they'd pause to replenish supplies and gather information. The military officers had been dismissive of any concerns about hostile Indians. Those stories are greatly exaggerated. The fort commander had chuckled, stamping their travel papers. The Sioux signed treaties last year. They're peacefully hunting buffalo 50 miles north of here. He tapped the map with military precision. Follow this route and you'll reach Idaho without seeing anything more dangerous than prairie dogs. Similar assurances greeted them at Horseshoe Creek's telegraph station. Just days earlier, the station operator had looked up from his instruments, annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, if I telegraphed east, every time someone spotted a hunting party, we'd crash the entire system," he told Fanny with a patronizing smile. "The Indians around here are more interested in trading than fighting. Been quiet for months." Franklin Kelly had studied the man's face. "You'd tell us if there was real danger on." "My honor, sir. The road ahead is clear all the way to South Pass." These professional assessments convinced the party to proceed without fear. They even declined to join a larger caravan for the sake of making better time. 20 miles a day instead of 12. That meant reaching the gold fields before the first snow that particular evening, July 12th. They'd made camp near clear spring water. The setting sun cast long shadows across their circle of wagons as Mary Wakefield skipped between them, her golden curls bouncing with each step. At 7 years old, she'd somehow maintained her spirit through the grueling journey. "Miss Fanny, look what I found." The child held up a prairie flower, its purple petals still dewy fresh. "It's beautiful," Mary Fanny replied, tucking it behind the girl's ear, "like a little piece of heaven." Mr. Wakefield sat on his wagon, tongue-tuning a well-traveled fiddle. The campfire crackled as coffee boiled in a blackened pot, and the scent of beans and bacon filled the air. This routine had become comfortingly familiar over the 8 weeks since leaving Kansas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wakefield announced with theatrical flourish. Raising his bow, I present the Idaho anthem. His fiddle struck up a lively tune as his rich tenor voice carried across the quiet prairie. "Ho for Idaho, where fortune's river flows, where gold lies thick upon the ground, and every man of fortune's found." Little Mary's sweet high voice joined the chorus. The child twirled beside the fire, her homespun dress billowing around skinny legs. Even the oxen seemed to lift their heads at the music. "Sing with us, Mr. Taylor." Mary called, but the taciturn man just smiled and continued cleaning his rifle, a ritual he performed each evening. With methodical precision, Franklin Kelly leaned against his wagon wheel, watching his wife set out tin plates for supper. The scene felt perfect, 5 families united in purpose, sharing a final meal before reaching their destination. The evening light bathed everything in a golden glow that seemed to promise the future they all sought. "I believe we'll be there by month's end," Kelly said, accepting a steaming cup from Fanny. "And not a bit of trouble the whole way." Mrs. Larimer nodded from where she sat, mending a shirt. "The Lord has blessed our journey." None of them noticed the sudden silence of the birds in the cottonwoods, or how the prairie dogs had disappeared into their burrows. The music and laughter masked any warning signs. As the sun slipped below the horizon, "Another day's journey tomorrow," Wakefield announced, setting down his fiddle. "And each mile brings us closer to our fortune." The travelers settled into their evening routine, unaware that just beyond the ridge, painted warriors were applying war colors to their faces and horses. Scouts had been tracking the small wagon train for 2 days, counting its members, assessing its defenses. Their reports had traveled back to the main camp, where a war council determined these settlers were perfect targets, isolated, poorly armed, and completely unaware. As darkness fell across the prairie, Fanny Kelly wrote in her journal by candlelight, "The scenery around us filled our hearts with joy. Today we travel peacefully onward, with visions bright as the western sky. Our small party moves quickly toward the promised land." She couldn't know these would be the last peaceful words she would write for many months. By this time tomorrow, half their party would lie dead upon the blood-stained grass, and she would be a captive, facing an unimaginable ordeal. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern bluffs when Franklin Kelly gave the order to move out. The 5 wagons formed a single file, wheels cutting fresh tracks across the Wyoming grass. No one in the party sensed the watching eyes, tracking their movement from the distant ridgeline. At midday, they stopped to rest the oxen near a shallow creek. The animals drank deeply, while Mary Wakefield collected wildflowers along the bank. The July heat shimmered across the plains, distorting the distant hills into wavy mirages. "Water barrels need filling," Franklin called, wiping sweat from his brow. "We may not find another creek before nightfall." The party had just finished their task when the landscape erupted in chaos. Without warning, the bluffs ahead swarmed with mounted warriors. Approximately 250 Sioux, their bodies streaked with war paint, in vermilion and black. They crested the ridge like a wave, brandishing rifles and bows, their war cries splitting the air. A thunderous volley of gunfire erupted as they fired into the sky. "My God," whispered Franklin Kelly, the blood draining from his face. Fanny Kelly clutched little Mary to her side as the child began to scream. "Quiet, darling," she whispered, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "It's happening so fast," Mrs. Larimer gasped. Stumbling backward toward her wagon, Franklin Kelly shouted over the chaos. "Form the wagons, circle up." The men scrambled to position their vehicles, but the open terrain offered little defensive advantage. The Sioux warriors encircled them in seconds, whooping and shouting as they tightened their noose. Wakefield raised his rifle, his knuckles white against the wooden stock. "No, Fanny." Kelly grabbed his arm. "There are too many. They'll slaughter us all." She turned to her husband, clutching his sleeve. "Franklin, don't fire, for God's sake. Try to talk to them." Franklin Kelly hesitated, measuring the overwhelming odds. 250 painted warriors against 5 civilian men with hunting rifles. The mathematics of survival were brutally clear. "She's right," he finally said, lowering his weapon. "We can't fight our way out of this." As the designated leader of their small train, Franklin Kelly stepped forward, raising his empty hands toward the advancing chief. The Sioux leader, an imposing figure, adorned with eagle feathers and beaded ornaments, spurred his pony forward, his face painted with red and black stripes, remained impassive as he approached. How? The chief called out, raising his hand. In what appeared to be a peaceful greeting. I am Ottawa, he announced in broken English. Thumping his chest, war chief of Oglala Sioux. He grinned, revealing teeth stained with tobacco. Good Indian, me heap. Good Indian, hunt buffalo and deer. Ottawa dismounted and extended his hand to Franklin Kelly. The settlers exchanged uncertain glances as the chief's band followed his example, crowding around the wagons and insisting on shaking everyone's hand repeatedly. What do you want, Franklin? Asked, his voice steady despite his fear. Ottawa's eyes flicked toward Kelly's fine bay horse. Trade, he said, pointing. My horse for your horse. Franklin's jaw tightened. The bay was his prized possession, a racing horse he'd brought all the way from Missouri. But with 250 armed warriors surrounding them, refusing wasn't an option. Fine, he said tersely. Handing over the reins, Ottawa smiled broadly, revealing yellowed teeth. Now food. Need flour? Mrs. Wakefield hurriedly produced a sack of precious flour. To her horror, the warriors immediately emptied it onto the ground, keeping only the cloth sack. What are they doing? She whispered to Fanny. That was almost the last of our supplies. Just let them take what they want, Fanny replied softly. We must keep them calm until help comes. For nearly an hour, the charade of friendliness continued. The warriors rifled through their possessions, taking clothing despite the summer heat cold. Soon one warrior explained unconvincingly, as he seized a woolen jacket. Fanny Kelly, attempting to maintain some semblance of normalcy, pointed to her worn-out shoes. If you take our things, I need moccasins. A young warrior surprisingly produced a beautifully beaded pair, handing them to her with an inscrutable expression. Throughout this tense exchange, little Mary clung to Fanny's skirts, her eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Larimer sat rigid on her wagon seat, clutching her Bible so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. Franklin Kelly kept scanning the horizon, hoping desperately for the dust cloud that would signal approaching travelers. They had passed another wagon earlier that morning. Perhaps they would catch up soon. Ottawa suddenly gestured to the trail ahead. You go now, we no trouble you. The settlers exchanged skeptical glances, but prepared to continue their journey. As they resumed their trek, warriors flanked them on both sides, herding them like cattle. After approximately a mile, Franklin Kelly called for a halt. Ahead lay a narrow ravine flanked by steep rocky walls. A perfect place for an ambush. We can't go that way, he announced firmly. Ottawa's face darkened. You go, he insisted, gesturing again toward the ravine. No, Franklin replied, standing his ground. We'll make camp here instead. For a moment tension crackled between them. Then unexpectedly Ottawa's demeanor shifted. Could we eat together? Then we sleep on hills, he declared, waving toward the surrounding bluffs. Relief washed over the settlers. Perhaps they had misread the situation. Maybe these were just hungry hunters seeking provisions. We'll prepare a meal, Fanny offered, already reaching for her cooking implements. Mr. Taylor began gathering firewood, while Mr. Wakefield retrieved cooking pots from his wagon. The atmosphere relaxed slightly as the settlers busied themselves with familiar tasks. Ottawa's warriors dismounted, lounging in small groups, watching the preparations with predatory eyes. Mrs. Larimer leaned close to Fanny as they arranged cooking supplies. I don't trust them, she whispered. The way they're watching us. Before Fanny could respond, the air exploded with gunfire. The peaceful facade shattered as warriors leveled their weapons and fired in unison. Through the cloud of gun smoke, Fanny saw Mr. Larimer running desperately toward the creek. Mr. Wakefield stumbled forward a few steps, then collapsed, blood blossoming across his chest. His fiddle still in the wagon. Would never play Ho for Idaho again. Mr. Taylor fell backward, a rifle ball having torn through his forehead, his dying gaze fixed on Fanny in those final seconds, as if imploring her to remember what happened here. Mr. Sharp dropped just feet away, instantly killed by multiple arrows. Frank, their loyal servant, collapsed at Fanny's feet, his body bristling with arrows. Like a terrible pincushion, the ground turned dark with spreading blood. Miraculously, Franklin, Kelly, and their other servant, and he managed to duck behind a wagon wheel. Avoiding the first volley, they scrambled toward the creek, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Pandemonium erupted as warriors swarmed the wagons. They tore off canvas covers, smashed open trunks with tomahawks, and scattered the settlers' possessions across the blood-soaked ground. China plates shattered, clothing flew through the air, and family Bibles were trampled underfoot. Fanny stood frozen, clutching Mary to her chest, trying to process the horror unfolding around her. She had just witnessed the slaughter of friends who had shared their breakfast with her that very morning. Two warriors suddenly rushed her wagon. Tomahawks raised, their faces were contorted in expressions of savage fury, eyes wild beneath paint-streaked foreheads. They seized Fanny by her arms and dragged her roughly to the ground. Pain shot through her legs as she landed awkwardly, nearly crushing the child she still protected. "Please," she gasped, turning to Mary, who stood trembling in the wagon. Fanny reached up, helping the sobbing child down. With Mary clinging to her skirts, Fanny approached Ottawa, who watched the carnage with cold detachment. She placed a hand on his arm, a desperate human gesture. "Please protect us," she begged, her voice breaking. "The children, have mercy." Ottawa's expression remained impassive. He placed his hand on the revolver at his side, not drawing it, but making its presence known. "Be quiet," he commanded, partly in broken English, partly gestures, "or die like them in the distance." A single wagon appeared on the horizon, another family traveling the same trail. With terrifying efficiency, Ottawa dispatched a group of warriors to intercept them. Fanny watched in horror as the horseman riding ahead of that wagon was quickly surrounded and cut down in a hail of arrows. But the family in the wagon reacted with remarkable speed. The husband immediately turned his team around and handed the reins to his wife as she drove furiously away. Clutching their youngest child to her chest, he positioned himself at the back of the wagon. In a desperate bid for survival, the man began throwing out everything they owned: trunks, boxes, furniture, supplies, lightening the wagon as his wife whipped the horses to greater speed. The Sioux riders closed in, riddling the wagon's canvas cover with bullets and arrows. One arrow passed through the sleeve of the child's dress without breaking skin, a miraculous near miss. The husband fired his revolver repeatedly, keeping the warriors at bay just long enough for the lightened wagon to pull ahead. After several minutes of pursuit, the warriors abandoned the chase, returning to the massacre site where greater spoils awaited. Fanny watched this distant escape with a mixture of relief and despair. Someone had survived to tell their story, but her own fate remained terrifyingly uncertain. She stood amid the ruins of her world, her husband either dead or fled, her friends slaughtered before her eyes, herself and little Mary now captives of warriors whose mercy seemed non-existent. The once peaceful prairie had transformed into a killing ground. In less than 15 minutes, the future that had seemed so bright that morning now stretched before her as a dark abyss of uncertainty. As the warriors gathered their plunder from the bloody scene, Fanny Kelly stood amid the chaos, clutching little Mary to her chest. Her world had collapsed in minutes. What awaited her in the Sioux camp? What became of her husband Franklin? And could anyone survive such an ordeal? This is just the beginning of Fanny Kelly's extraordinary story. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories to discover what happened next in this harrowing frontier tale.